You may never have heard of John G. Paton unless you're a fan of the biographies of great missionaries. John Paton was a Scottish minister who felt God's call to leave grand old Scotland and travel to the New Hebrides, a collection of islands in the South Pacific, now known as the nation of Vanuatu. I think I got that right. He went to share the gospel with the cannibals who lived there. When one of his church members found out what he was about to do, he said, "The cannibals! You'll be eaten by the cannibals." Well, Paton went anyway. And when he got there, God used him in a mighty fashion. He started off, built a mission home, built 2 orphanages. Not read his biography, but from what I read on the internet, it sounds like he was trying to share the love of Jesus by meeting the needs of his neighbors. Where have I heard that before? The first convert to Christ was the chief of the dominant tribe there on that particular island, a man named Nemeki. His second convert to Christ was Nemeki's brother, who interestingly had tried numerous times to shoot the missionary dead. Well, when those 2 leaders came to Christ, the gospel took off among the cannibals. The killers of children found forgiveness in the Son of God. One man was led to Christ by his wife, for whom he had actually killed his first wife. A little boy came to Christ and then was heard to tell people that he was kind of sad that he was going to miss the honor and the opportunity of becoming a killer. Talk about a rough place to talk about Jesus. But talk about changed lives. In addition to his mission work, Paton traveled extensively, and back then that was a challenge, preaching about the need for missions and the support of missions, and also about the need for more support and more missionaries to the cannibals in the islands of the New Hebrides. His efforts inspired missionaries from Scotland through Australia. And his story continues to inspire people today. According to Randy Alcorn, a very well-known Christian author, because of Paton's story, nearly 1 in 6 Presbyterian ministers in Australia left to serve as missionaries. John G. Paton was a man of courage. We all want to matter, don't we? We all want to make a difference. We all want to hope that when we leave this world, the world will have been a better place because we were in it. Well, wouldn't it be great to be used by God to make a difference in the world, to make a difference in Christendom, to make a difference in the lives of the people around us? Well, if you study the lives of people whom God has used to make a difference, you'll find a pattern. You'll find a pattern. John Paton left a comfortable pastorate in his homeland to go to a strange land. God called Abram and Sarai, also known as Abraham and Sarah, to leave their fathers, to leave their families, to go to a strange land. He called Ruth to leave her homeland and her gods for a new land and new gods. He called Amos to leave his tree farm. God calls people. Now, God may not call you or me to leave our comfortable surroundings to go someplace strange like the New Hebrides or New York City. But God always calls people to leave the comfortable for the uncomfortable. To go where the going is tough. Because it's where the going is tough that God tends to do His greatest works. God calls. So the question then is, when God calls, how do we go? How do we follow? Join me in 1 Kings 16, verse 29, where we will begin a study of one of my heroes of the faith, Elijah the prophet. I love the stories of Elijah. Now, to find 1 Kings, unless you've got a cell phone or a pad, start in Genesis, probably the easiest way. Sail to the right through the first 5 books, which are the foundation of the Old Testament. You'll pass Joshua, Judges. You'll actually see Ruth in there, and then you'll come to 1 and 2 Samuel. Then you'll arrive at 1 Kings. You need chapter 16. Now, when we meet Elijah, he's already left his hometown of Tishba to go to Samaria to confront the king and queen. Now, I'm hoping that the lessons we learn from the life of Elijah will help us not to be satisfied with our comfort zones, but to be willing to move outside of our comfort zones and to live beyond our comfort zones. Lesson number 1, follow God with courage. Follow God with courage. How do we do that? Well, first of all, accept the challenge. What a challenge God gave Elijah. Let's take a look at the text starting at verse 29, where we'll get a little background and kind of see what a morass Elijah was jumping into. Now, Ahab, the son of Omri, and Omri was one of the most influential kings in the northern kingdom's history, became king over Israel in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah. And Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel and Samaria for 22 years. Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. It came about as though it had been a trivial thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. Now, the sin of Jeroboam was to keep the northern kingdom in the north. He erected 2 golden calves on either end of his kingdom as symbols of Yahweh, but the people began to worship the golden calves. Okay, the sins of Nebat. So, it wasn't bad enough that he walked in the sins of his father Jeroboam, but he married Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went to serve Baal and worshipped him. So he erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. Ahab also made the Asherah. Thus, Ahab did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel than all the kings of Israel who were before him. Boy. Now, the worship of false gods had been a real problem in Israel from their time in Egypt onward. And if God had just been a God of wrath, like I said, they wouldn't have gotten out of the period of the judges, okay? But it continued. It got a little worse when Solomon started worshiping foreign gods, false gods with his foreign wives. It got a little worse when Jeroboam set up the 2 golden calves. But when Ahab married Jezebel, idol worship left the palace and crashed the public square. Ahab and Jezebel did everything in their royal power to promote Baal and to demote Yahweh. In addition to building worship centers for Baal and supporting literally hundreds of the prophets of Baal, they set out to murder all the prophets of Yahweh, all the prophets of the Lord. So Yahweh called Elijah to go stand up against Ahab and Jezebel. Look at verse 1. Now Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the settlers of Gilead, said to Ahab, "As Yahweh Elohim of Israel lives, before whom I stand, surely there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word." Now, Yahweh and his prophet were not just showing off. Okay, they were picking a fight. Baal was the storm god, the god of storms, rain, and fertility. And his worshippers, like many ancient peoples and their systems of worship, they believed that Baal died through part of the year, the dry part of the year. And he came back to life in the rainy season, in the rainy part of the year. This was a very common theme in ancient religions. So basically, Elijah said, Yahweh lives, Baal does not. And to prove it to you, king and queen, and to everybody else, there will be neither dew nor rain until Yahweh and I say so. Pick a fight. Pick a fight. Now, wouldn't you love to have been a fly on the wall of Elijah's house when Yahweh issued his challenge? I can hear the prophet. Are you crazy, Yahweh? Ahab is the most powerful man in the kingdom, and his wife Jezebel, she's nuts. Okay, they'll have my head, or worse. Couldn't I just stay here in Tishbe and be your prophet in my own little hometown? But Elijah followed God with courage. So what is courage? Some people think that courage is the absence of fear. No. I'm pretty sure Elijah was really scared when he went to talk to Ahab and Jezebel, because quite frankly, Elijah wasn't nuts. What is courage? Well, I did a little digging. One of my favorite resources is the exposition. Try saying S's and T's with a retainer in your mouth. The Expository Dictionary of Bible Words. It says that the Hebrew words, the two Hebrew words translated brave, are connected to strength. The courageous person, this is from that book, acts with confidence to attack vigorously the challenges before him. Elijah courageously accepted the challenge Yahweh had given him. Put it another way. Courage is the determination to do what is hard or scary. Elijah was determined to do the hard and scary thing Yahweh asked him to do. Accept the challenge. So, I got to ask, what has God challenged you to do? Talk to a friend who doesn't know Jesus and tell him about what Jesus did for you last week. Maybe invite him to come with you to church. Courage. What does God challenge you to do? Stand up for a friend at work who's been unfairly and unjustly, wrongly harassed by his supervisor and who's in danger of losing his job? Courage. What does God challenge you to do? Maybe lead an outreach Bible study class. Maybe teach a Sunday school class. You say, I'm too old. I'm too young. I'm overqualified. I'm underqualified. The determination to do what is hard or scary. A young couple in a sister church has been about a year and a half teaching the college and career age group in their church. And when they took the class, that class was running about 8 or 9. And they were having a great time in the class. But then one day, they went to a football game and there was a Facebook post picturing the husband of that couple with a bottle of beer in his hand. Now here's the deal. In most Baptist churches, this is kind of a generational issue. Christians 50 years and older think that drinking alcohol of any kind at any time is a sin, whereas Christians 50 years and younger don't see the big deal. Now, it's an interesting biblical question and discussion, which we don't have time to pursue right now. Suffice it to say that overnight, that class's attendance dwindled from 8 and 9 to 4 and 5. And that's where it stayed for months and months. Well, the young couple's lives began, as life tends to do, get more and more complicated. They had a new baby on the way. Their businesses were taking off and expanding. Their lives were a rat race, squirrels on the spinning wheel, and they were looking for some way to de-stress, to decomplicate. And they thought, well, let's just give up the class at the end of the year. It's not working. Let somebody else have a crack at it. We're clearly not being successful. But to their surprise, God told both of them, keep the class. Keep teaching the class. But God, it's hard. Keep teaching the class. But God, we're so stressed. But God, it's not working. Keep teaching the class. So they did. In January, suddenly the class started growing. Back up to 8, then 10, then 14, then 18 in regular attendance. They're reaching new college students right and left. I mean, Knoxville is this college town, and they're reaching people right and left. And then one Sunday, one of their, is this correct, new reachees, walked the aisle after worship, and the pastor helped him pray to receive Christ. And now, God is working on that young man's girlfriend. When God calls us, we need to accept the challenge. We may also have to endure the consequences. Sometimes doing what God asks us to do can get you into trouble. Let's go back to the text, starting at verse 2 of 17. The word of the Lord came to Elijah, saying, "Go away from here and turn eastward and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. It shall be that you will drink of the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to provide for you there." So he went and did according to the word of the Lord, for he went and lived by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he would drink from the brook. Well, it happened after a while that the brook dried up because there was no rain in the land. Elijah goes. He picks the fight. And then Yahweh, ever practical, and if you've walked with Yahweh very long, you'll discover God is very practical. And God says to his prophet, dude, it's time to get out of Dodge. And so Elijah runs for his life and hides out by the brook Cherith. Now, folks, this was not a Club Med, okay? See, he camped by a wadi. It says brook, but the word brook in Hebrew is translated the Hebrew word wadi. A wadi was a stream that had water in it only in the rainy season. Well, God sent him to a wadi in the midst of a drought. Okay? And I'm pretty sure the ravens weren't bringing him 4-course meals. I mean, even if there was a steady stream of these black birds bringing meat and bread in the morning and the evening, the prophet was going to have to tighten his belt. And then the brook dried up. Okay? Years ago, I heard somebody observe, God cares more about our character than our comfort. That's been my experience. Sometimes God leads us to dry stream beds and slim pickings. And if you study the history of God's people, you'll see that again and again. I've heard young people, when I was a young person, I remember my teen years, serving Jesus. It was such an exciting time. And people would say, gosh, I wish I were Peter. Gosh, I wish I were John. Gosh, I wish I were Andrew, who was always bringing people to Jesus. Come on, his first apostles, they were all killed for their faith. I wanted to be a Bible scholar, a language scholar, Janice. The first language scholars who translated the scriptures from Greek and Hebrew into English were all killed. Didn't end well for them. When John Patton arrived in the New Hebrides, he had to bury his wife and his newborn son. And he spent the early years of his ministry literally running for his life from the cannibals whom he'd been trying to reach for Jesus. Yeah, in the early days of my walk, I'd hear preachers say, "Come to Jesus and your life will be easy. Come to Jesus and all your problems will be solved." Come to Jesus and you'll have His power to face your problems. Come to Jesus and you'll have answers for your questions. Frankie, most of them. Why does God lead us into hard times? Before I give you the two answers that came to mind, I just thought of another one. Adrian Rogers once said, "Before you accept Christ, you are in collusion with the devil. After you accept Christ, you're in collision with the devil." You're in a fight. Well, anyway, why does God lead us into hard times? A couple of answers that came to mind. First, to get us ready. To get us ready for what? For what's coming. This is Elijah's beginning, okay? And I think God is toughening up the prophet. He's got a lot of amazing things, a lot of amazing challenges ahead of him. God's getting him ready. I love what Paul wrote in Romans chapter 8. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? As it is written, we were being put to death all the day long. We were considered as sheep to be slaughtered. But in all these things we overwhelmingly conquer through Him who loved us. I think the NIV translates that, we are more than conquerors through Him who loved us. He leads us into hard times to toughen us up, to make us more than conquerors. He leads us into hard times to get us ready. Secondly, I think He leads us into hard times to prove His reality. That was certainly the case with Elijah. It was all about proving Yahweh was real, Baal was not. And that was certainly true in the Apostle Paul's life and ministry. Paul was used by God in a mighty fashion. Paul's theology really helped Christendom understand what Jesus came to do. Paul started the missionary movement, but Paul paid for it with imprisonments and all kinds of problems. But he writes to his friends in Philippi, starting in verse 12 of chapter 1. Now, I want you to know, brethren, that my circumstances have turned out for the greater progress of the gospel, so that my imprisonment in the cause of Christ has become well known throughout the whole Praetorian Guard and everyone else, and that most of the brethren, trusting in the Lord because of my imprisonment, have far more courage to speak the word of God without fear. So, why did Paul's imprisonment bolster the courage of the Christians in this fledgling Christian movement? Paul's willingness to suffer imprisonment proved that the gospel was real. It was like Paul was saying to the world, Jesus is real and Jesus is worth it. On June 14th, 2021, Tim Stevens, the pastor of the Fairview Baptist Church in Alberta, Canada, was arrested on Monday morning as he was leaving his house for work, and he was hauled away in handcuffs. It seems that the day before, his church had a worship service in a park without face masks and without any kind of strict social distancing, and a police helicopter that was patrolling the community looking for just such events saw it, reported it, and on Monday morning they arrested him. See, at that point Canada had entered phase 2 of the COVID lockdown. And people, don't forget what happened in COVID. Learn some lessons about liberty and risk from what happened in COVID. Was it Benjamin Franklin who said, people who surrender their liberty for their security deserve neither? Give that some thought. Anyway, we had similar experience. In phase 2, most of the public buildings were open, but they were limited to 33% capacity. Dining in restaurants, attending worship services, or participating in indoor gatherings of any kind were illegal. They were against the law and were arrestable offenses. So, why did Stevens and other Canadian pastors willingly break the law to wind up in jail? Said James Coates, another pastor who spent a month in jail for refusing to obey Canada's COVID laws. I'm simply here in obedience to Jesus Christ. And it's my obedience to Christ that has put me at odds with the law. They're basically saying Jesus is real and Jesus is worth it. Wired into the heart of every person is the desire, and I would argue the need to matter, the need to have value, the need to make a difference. It may only be in our great-grandkids. It may only be where we work or where we go to school. But we want to matter. We want to make a difference in people's lives. C.T. Studd was a British missionary who was born into extravagant wealth, but who then gave all of his wealth away and followed God to the mission field, first to China, then to India, and then ultimately to Africa. He wrote a rather famous poem in missions circles that has this refrain: only one life 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last.